Well, welcome to this DVD, which looks at the ministry of American Interim Pastors. American Interim Pastors have been around since the year 2000, and we in the UK have benefited immensely from people coming over from the States to help our churches for what is normally a 6-month period. My name's John Singleton. I'm one of the regional ministers in the Northern Baptist Association, and we thought it would be good for you to hear about 2 American interim pastorates that have taken place during 2011. The first one of those, which we're going to cover in a moment, is Cambridge Road Baptist Church in Middlesbrough. And then in a little while we'll talk about another situation at Westow Road Baptist Church in South Shields. Firstly now, I am joined by Carey, who's the church secretary at the church in Middlesbrough. Chris, I wonder if you could tell us first of all, what were the events that led to you looking at the possibility of an American interim pastor?
Well, the situation was that we had a young pastor who was much loved in the church, who suddenly resigned from his post, and it was quite unexpected. And when something like that happens, it causes all sorts of problems within a church. First and foremost, you have to think about, who's going to do the preaching, who's going to be leading the services and preaching week on week. There's also then the pastoral needs of the church, which are heightened by the fact that there's been a sudden change. The sudden change generates some extra pastoral needs. And in addition to that, there's concerns about the longer term direction of the church. Where is the church going in terms of its ministry and its vision and direction? So all of this together, created a real need, which was quite overwhelming for the leadership of the church. We had some experience of American Interim. We understood what American Interim was about. God has blessed us in the past. Chuck McComb, who started American Interim, was a member of the Cambridge Road Church way back in the 1970s. And through keeping contact with him, we had the opportunity to invite Chuck to serve as an interim pastor back in the year 2000, which I think was the very first time that Chuck had considered doing anything like that. And I think from there, the idea of American Interim sort of blossomed to what it is today. So we had an idea of what American Interim was all about, and it just seemed to the leadership team that it was a strong possibility to meet the particular needs that we were experiencing.
So Chris, you've talked about the events that led to you looking. What was the actual process that you went through in terms of selecting a pastor?
Well, we let Chuck know that we were thinking about this particular route, and as we come to expect from Chuck, he was most enthusiastic to help in whatever way he could. So he started looking for possible candidates that would be prepared to come and serve, for a period of time as we needed them. So I think what we got from Chuck was a set of profiles of candidates. And these were enhanced by, I think in all cases, having a videotape of some description that we could look at to understand, what this candidate was like in terms of preaching and leading in services, but also an opportunity for them to explain a little bit more of their interest in doing this. So really it was for the leadership team to consider profiles of candidates and determine whether we were prepared to propose any of those to the church membership.
Now, going on from the process, Chris, perhaps you could tell us who you chose and why you chose them.
It was a case, as it often is, of putting it to the church meeting and to say, this is how we feel God is leading us. Do you agree with us? Do you think this is what God would have us do? Now, when it's the church meeting, obviously a proportion of the church meeting had met Chuck, and they knew what American Interim was all about, and therefore were quite open to the idea. But there were a good number of members who hadn't been around in 2000, who joined the church since then, who had no idea what it was about, and in some ways were quite apprehensive about inviting an American in. I think it's a natural apprehension. I think there's all sorts of experiences of Americans in Christian religious setups, and you can imagine some inappropriate appointments being made. I think as a leadership we were confident that wouldn't be the case here, because we know Chuck so well, and we had faith in Chuck that he would propose candidates that were absolutely appropriate to the situation that we were in. So I think that was part of it. Was about convincing the church meeting. We were helped a great deal in that process by the fact that there was the videotape, and in Darrell and Faith's case there was a rather nice interview. They'd arranged to be interviewed by their granddaughters about their feelings and thinking about serving as American Interim, and that particular video went down really well with our church meeting. They really warmed to that, and I think we also looked for some assurance about their previous ministries in the UK, because this was not the first time that Darrell and Faith had served in the UK. In fact, I think it was the fourth time. So we had, through yourself, John, you'd come across them at Hamsterley, and we had some reference from previous churches that they'd served in Yorkshire, that they really were, the kind of people we wanted to do the job.
How long did they come for, and what were the outcomes of their time with you?
They arrived in, I think, the February and stayed till the June or July, so it was 4 or 5 months that they stayed with us. I think the standard term for an American Interim coming over is usually 6 months. They either come for the first half of the year or the second half of the year. We were aiming at the first half of the year, but there were delays in getting visas through, so it was late February, even March, before Darrell and Faith actually arrived. It was far too short. We would have loved to have had them for much longer, but we understood that they had responsibilities back home and family back home, and they would want to be back. And it was from the outset we understood exactly how long they were with us. In terms of the impact, well, you'd have to ask the church members exactly what they think of the impact. But from a leadership perspective, it was all that we hoped for and more. I think one member of the leadership team has said, it's as if God understood exactly the situation we were in and had handpicked the couple to come and minister amongst us. Because in a situation where, there were some very real pastoral needs and a lot of questions, Darrell and Faith were able to come and really just put their arms around the church and give us a big hug, and tell us, that things were not as bad as they seemed, and that there was a hope and there was a future, and God was still great. And that, in a slow and steady way, had a profound impact on the church, which we're still benefiting from today.
So the American Interim has finished. What stage is the church at now?
Okay, well, it's quite interesting because we hadn't started seeking for a full-time minister while Darrell and Faith were with us. In some ways it was too early in the process and in the thinking. So immediately we had to think, did we want to appoint another interim minister? And a possibility would have been to go back to Chuck and said, do you have somebody else available to follow on from Darrell and Faith? In the meantime, the church meeting had started talking about inviting one of our itinerant preachers that had been coming to preach when we didn't have somebody in place. A retired guy a retired Baptist minister who we knew quite well, and had always been very well received in his preaching ability, to approach him to see if he would be prepared to effectively come out of retirement to serve as interim pastor. And he agreed to do that, so he started with us in September of this year on an open-ended part-time basis, really on the understanding that it will be up until we make a full-time appointment. So that's where we are today. We have started seeking for a full-time appointment. We've been doing that since round about the same time that this interim started, and he is helping us, he's chairing us through that process.
Finally, Chris, what would you say to other churches in the UK that might be prepared to consider inviting an American interim?
Well, obviously, I think our experience has been a very positive one. I would hope that any UK church that invites an American interim over will have a positive experience. So I wouldn't hesitate about the fact that they're American and it's a different culture. The people that Chuck invites over are very aware of the cultural differences and will fit in. I think in our case, it was a case of a specific need and a specific answer to that need. We couldn't see the end from the beginning, but God had his hand on it, and you know, we've been blessed as a result of doing that. I would have hesitation to think about assuming that an American interim is right in each and every circumstance, but for the particular circumstance we were in, it was the right answer, and I would hope for other churches they would find that that would be the same.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Chris. You've been very helpful. Thank you so much for your time.